Here is a regular
Look at this
wild carp
beauty,
weighing
a true wild
12.5
carp.
kilos,
The carp
and I
approaches
caught
the
it
baited hook
exactly
on the
4
lake bed.
minutes after the bait
It
touched the
bites.
bottom of an oxbow lake of the Dnieper. For 30 years I
Feels
fished
like
this
a bite
water,
coming.
considering myself a
There it
pro.
is.
All this time I was doing it wrong, and today I will
Let's
show
try
you
a
what
practice
exactly
cast.
changed in my mind and in my tackle bag. No
Gotcha!
golden
Look at this
reels,
beauty.
no marketing
Who
tricks
needs
from
fancy
glossy
gear?
magazines, and no
The
chemicals
secret
for
is mixing
crazy
grains and
money.
bread.
This knowledge is not from the internet. This is what was passed down by grandfathers in remote villages of Polesia and on the banks of the Volga, even before the first fishing store in the country sold its first imported boilie. Welcome to the place where we don't sell tackle, but return to anglers their rightful claim to a trophy. Right now in your kitchen in a regular cabinet sits a bait that draws in wild carp, grass carp, and trophy catfish faster than any secret additive from Europe. And while you spend thousands on attractants, the old masters laugh pulling out fish for 12 kopecks a kilogram. Imagine that the lake seems dead, silent, and your neighbors haven't had a single bite in 24 hours. But as soon as you cast this dirt-cheap gold, the drag starts screaming within a minute. This is not a myth or a tall tale from the smoking room. In the 1970s in the USSR, this was the standard. It was written about in rare articles of the Sportsman Angler magazine. This was known by gamekeepers on the Caspian and commercial fishermen on the Amur. Then this method disappeared, but not because it stopped working, but because it is profitable for the industry to sell you bright little jars for $30 rather than teach you how to make bait out of what pigs eat on a collective farm. But even the few who have heard about drunken corn or fermentation make one fatal mistake at the exact moment of the bite. And today, we will break down this biological drama down to the last atom. Fishing for wild carp or river catfish has never been a matter of luck. Those who consistently catch 10 and 20 pounders at dawn have simply eliminated the variables. And the most important variable that the modern angler ignores is the chemical signal. Fresh canned corn is dessert. Boiled feed corn is lunch. But fermented corn that has been fermenting for exactly 5 days is an irresistible instinct. It is the call of the ancestors encoded in the fish's DNA. It's no wonder that on many sport fishing lakes in Europe, there are unspoken rules restricting the volume of such ground bait. It makes the fight unfair. It draws the fish in too quickly, turning an intellectual duel into an assembly line. Let's look into the archives of our memory. The 1950s in the post-war USSR, when fishing was not a hobby, but a means of survival and a support for the family table. From the Volga to the Irtysh, from the Kuban estuaries to the Kazakh lakes. Back then, there were no hair rigs or safety clips. There were bamboo poles, Nevskaya reels, and an understanding of nature. The old men knew that grain left in a bucket by the stove begins to sing after a few days. Bacteria turn sugar into a powerful attractant that spreads in the water for hundreds of meters. This knowledge was passed from mouth to mouth. In Siberia, this is how they caught wild carp in the snags. In Ukraine, they lured catfish out of the Desna pits. Was the fish bigger back then? No. The hunters were just smarter and didn't rely on advertising. Now, we will scientifically break down why the grandfather's homemade bait beats modern technologies. Cyprinids are machines for chemical water analysis. Their sensitivity to amino acids boggles the mind. Ichthyological studies confirm a wild carp can detect specific signals at a concentration of 1 TSP per 2,000 Olympic swimming pools. They have olfactory rosettes located under their eyes, working like a chemical compass. When corn ferments in a jar for 5 days at room temperature, lactic acid bacteria, such as Lactobacillus plantarum, begin their great work. They break down starches and proteins, releasing free amino acids, glycine, L-glutamic acid, and arginine. For the fish, this is not just a smell, it is a signal. Food is here. The food is easily digestible. The food is safe. A modern boilie is covered with a hard shell. It releases its signal slowly, while fermented grain is a chemical bomb that starts radiating the moment it touches the bottom. In still water, a wild carp smells it from 25 millimeters away, and a river catfish follows the current to it from 40 millimeters away, driven by a reflex that is stronger than the fear of the hook. We conducted tests on 3 different bodies of water, from heavily pressured Moscow region ponds to the wild floodplains of the Don. Fermented corn yields 4 times more bites than regular canned corn, and it outperforms expensive English baits 3 times over in hookup ratio. The cost of a 50 torters-lb bag of feed corn at an agricultural market is pennies compared to the annual budget for branded bait. The price difference reaches 18 times, but the result in favor of the trash bait is obvious to anyone who knows how to count. Why then are grandfathers' methods sometimes called harmful? The mistake is that modern armchair experts confuse fermentation with rotting. The old men used to say, "The grain should sour, not rot." If you over-ferment the starter or seal the lid tight, you will get methane and hydrogen sulfide. This is a danger signal that will scare the fish away for kilometers. Nature does not tolerate amateurs. It is important to catch the 5-day window when the amino acid level is at its peak, and the smell resembles fresh beer wort or sourdough starter. This is exactly the generational conflict. The youth buy ready-made products thinking they are paying for results, while the old men prepared it themselves, investing in understanding of biology. Now in 2026, when the fishing pressure on waters is extreme, the fish have become smarter. They have learned to avoid the harsh perfume smells of commercial boilies, but they will never refuse the smell of natural fermentation, because it is the smell of life in the water. So that your next night session doesn't turn into feeding the mosquitoes, you need to remember the basics. Use a hair rig so that 3 or 4 kernels hang separately from the hook, giving the fish a chance to swallow the bait without suspicion. Don't rush to set the hook at the first tap. The wild carp must turn around, creating that very slack in the line for a second, which beginners mistake for a dropped bait. This is the rhythm of the river. Touch, pause, tension. We are here to return fishing to its original simplicity and honesty. The experience of generations backed by science, this is the real key to a trophy. Very soon, I will reveal the details of that very recipe that will make your bite alarm scream even during a dead bite. Knowledge is the lightest tackle you take with you to the bank, and only practice separates an angler from just a person with a fishing rod. Let's be honest. When you walk into a modern fishing supermarket, you are not entering a store for anglers, but a pastry shop for millionaires. Bright labels, smells of strawberry, pineapple, and octopus. All this is designed to catch you, not the fish. Have you ever wondered why a carp in a wild lake should react to the smell of a tropical fruit that it has never seen in its life? The answer is simple. It doesn't react to the fruit. It reacts to the chemical signal that manufacturers mask as a pleasant aroma for the human nose. But today, we will tear off these masks. We will talk about how to make biology work for you for mere pennies. If you think that fermented corn is just rotten grain, you are deeply mistaken. It is a high-tech biochemical attractant created by nature itself. Remember the 70s and 80s. In times of shortage, a Soviet angler couldn't go and buy a dip or attractant. He had ingenuity and access to the collective farm's grain warehouse. On the banks of the Volga, in the lower reaches of the Don, and on the endless expanses of the reservoirs of Kazakhstan, Our fathers and grandfathers used drunken corn not out of a good life, but because it produced results that seem like fantasy today. It was an era when fishing fed families, when in one daylight day on a bottom rig they caught as much wild carp as a modern carp fisher doesn't catch in an entire season with all their tents and gadgets. And the secret was not in the amount of fish in the rivers. Although that played a role, it was in understanding how fish look for food. Let's move on to the numbers that will make you reconsider your budget for your next trip. A kilogram of high-quality imported boilies in 2026 costs as much as 30 kilos of feed corn from the nearest grain elevator. That's a 30.1 ratio. But here is what's shocking. Under conditions of heavy fishing pressure on Moscow region or Kiev Pay lakes, where the fish have seen all kinds of plastic and chemicals, fermented grain beats commercial hook baits by a score of 3-1 in the number of bites. On wild rivers such as the Dniester or the Ural, this gap becomes even larger. The wild carp is no fool. It has genetic memory. It knows the smell of decomposing organics, the smell of sprouting grain, the smell of natural fermentation that occurs on the bottom of the lake every autumn. For it, this is a signal of safety and easy calories. Now, about the biology. Why exactly 5 days? Why not 2 or 10? Here lies that very scientific precision that marketers keep quiet about. In the first 48 hours of fermentation, the dominant bacteria are those that simply process sugar. On the 3rd and 4th day, lactobacilli come into play. They create an acidic environment that acts as a powerful electrolyte in the water. The water in your lake most often has a neutral or slightly alkaline pH. The acidic signal from the fermented grain in such an environment spreads at the speed of a forest fire. The fish feels this pH change with its lateral line and with the receptors on its barbels from tens of meters away. It's as if in a dark room someone opened a bottle of ammonia. You don't see it, but you know exactly where it is located. On the 5th day, the concentration of free amino acids, such as L-proline and alanine, reaches its peak. These are the very building blocks of life that the fish is obligated to consume for growth. It cannot swim past. It is forced by the survival instinct. And now about that very critical mistake made by 90% of anglers who decide to try this method. They treat drunken corn like a regular hook bait. They thread it directly onto the hook, piercing the kernel straight through. This is fatal. Fermented grain is softer than usual. During the cast, or at the very first attempt by a small fish to taste it, it flies off, leaving the hook bare. But that's only half the trouble. The main problem is that a wild carp is a vacuum cleaner. It sucks in water along with debris and food, filters it through its gill rakers, and spits out the excess. If it feels the metal of the hook before the grain reaches its pharyngeal teeth, you will only see a short tap on the tip of the rod. Only a hair rig, only a thin hook link, and 2 or 3 kernels hanging below the hook. The fish must suck in the corn without feeling the weight and resistance of the hook. And here we come to the moment of the hook set. Forget about sharp jerks in the style of uprooting a stump. When fishing with fermented grain, the fish takes the bait confidently, but carefully. When you see that the tip of the rod starts to tremble, it's not a bite. It's the fish tasting the chemical cloud. Wait. Wait for the moment when the line starts slowly moving to the side or pulls tight like a string. This means that the wild carp has taken the bait and started moving. At this moment between you and the fish, magic happens. The lactic acid in the grain blocks the fish's caution. It literally gets drunk on the appetite stimulants and loses its vigilance. Many ask, what about catfish? And here I have a surprise for fans of night fishing. Channel Catfish and our European river giant adore fermented products. A catfish is, first and foremost, a nose on fins. Its sense of smell is honed for finding carrion and decomposing organics. The acidic profile of 5-day-old corn is a signal to it that somewhere nearby there is easy prey. I have seen how on the reservoirs of Central Asia, catfish weighing 15 kilograms would hit a regular feeder with fermented grain, completely ignoring the live frogs and bunches of worms of the neighbors. It seems absurd, but it is a fact confirmed by decades of practice in the lower reaches of the Amu Darya and Sir Darya. But be careful. If you decide to add store-bought attractants to the jar, you will ruin everything. Nature has already created the perfect balance. Adding chemicals disrupts the process of natural fermentation, kills the lactobacilli, and turns your bait into toxic garbage. The maximum you can allow yourself is a spoonful of natural honey or a glass of unrefined sunflower oil with a smell of seeds, which will create an oil slick on the surface of the water, slowly releasing the scent into different layers of water. Remember, old methods are not about poverty. They are about efficiency. In 2026, when the world is overloaded with information, the one who wins is the one who returns to the roots, backing them up with a scientific approach. We are not just catching fish, we are hacking their source code written millions of years ago. And this code does not change with the exchange rate or the release of a new real model. The next part will be even hotter. I will give you a step-by-step algorithm for the 5-day process that will turn your kitchen into a laboratory of success. And I will tell you how to properly choose a spot so that this chemical signal doesn't go to waste. Get ready. We are just beginning our dive into real fishing. Many of you are now looking at your tackle boxes with expensive boilies and thinking, have I really been deceived all these years? The answer is unpleasant but honest. You were not deceived. You were simply sold comfort instead of results. Marketing whispers that for $30 you are buying the key to any fish. But the truth is that this key has long been lying in a bag of feed grain at any rural mill. Let's move on to the hardcore practice for which the manufacturers of fishing bait will hate me. If you want to catch fish and not feed the industry, listen carefully. Now we will break down the step-by-step protocol for preparing that very drunken corn that will turn your next trip to the Volga, Dnieper, or a regular village pond into a triumph. Write this down because the devil is in the details that armchair experts from the internet usually miss. Step 1. Choosing the raw material. Forget about sweet corn in tin cans from the supermarket. That's a snack, not bait. We need hard feed grain, which is sold in bags of 40-50 kilos. Why? Because it retains all its natural structure, all the husks and complex sugars that will become the fuel for our biochemical reaction. Take a regular glass 3-liter jar or a clean plastic bucket. They used such containers to fish back in the 70s in the Kuban and the lower reaches of the Volga. Fill the container with corn exactly 2.3 full. This is critically important. The grain will expand when soaked and fermented, and if you pour in more, your laboratory will simply explode. Step 2. Water and activator. Pour clean water over the corn so that the level is 5 to 7 centimeters above the grain. Now, the main old-school secret. For every liter of water, we add 1 generous tablespoon of regular white sugar. In 2026, this costs pennies. But for the bacteria, it is a powerful starter. If you want to speed up the process on large rivers like the Dniester or the Ural, you can add a teaspoon of dry yeast, but I advise going the natural road. And now the most important thing, the lid. Never, you hear me, never close the jar tightly. During the process of fermentation, a huge amount of carbon dioxide is released. Close it tightly, and in 3 days, your kitchen will turn into an ecological disaster zone with the aroma of a fermented grain elevator. Just cover it with a lid on top so the gas can escape and dust doesn't get inside. Step 3. The temperature window. Place the jar in a warm place. In our climate, whether it's Siberia, the Volga region, or Belarus, in summer, a garage or balcony is perfect. The optimal temperature is from 22 to 28 graus. Biology is an exact science. At 15 degrees, the process will drag on for 2 weeks, and at 30, the corn will simply burn and turn into sticky mush. We need exactly 5 days. Day 1, you will see the first bubbles. The bacteria have woken up. Day 3, the water will become cloudy like a weak brine. Day 5, you will smell the scent. It's not the stench of rot. It's a thick, bready, slightly alcoholic aroma of high-quality moonshine mash or fresh sourdough. If it smells so good that you want to taste it yourself, congratulations. You have created the perfect attractant. If, however, it reeks of rotten eggs, you allowed dirt to get in or over-fermented the grain. Pour it out and start over. Nature does not forgive mistakes. Now, let's debunk the main myth about grandfather's tackle. Many think that since the bait is cheap, the tackle must be made of a stick and string. This is a mistake that costs trophies. The old men in the USSR fished with thick lines and huge hooks, not because it was right, but because there was nothing else. Today, we combine the power of biochemistry and modern presentation technologies. Here we come to that very critical mistake I mentioned at the beginning. Most anglers, even after preparing the perfect corn, pierce it straight through with the hook. Remember, fermented grain actively releases amino acids through its pores. When you pierce it with a hook, you disrupt the geometry of the release of these signals. Moreover, the point of the hook is masked in the grain, and when a 15-kilo wild carp carefully sucks in your bait, it feels a hard foreign object and instantly spits it out. You see this as a slight rattle of the quiver tip and think small fish playing around? No, that was your trophy of a lifetime, which figured out your tactics in half a second. Use only a hair rig, 2 or 3 kernels on the hair, the hook completely exposed. When the wild carp sucks in the kernels, the hook flies in right behind. As soon as the fish tries to spit out the incomprehensible object, the hook, due to its shape and weight, catches on the lower lip. This is mechanics you can't argue with. Another important point for those who fish on reservoirs and large rivers: pressure. In 2026, the fish on such waters as the Kanav or Simlyansk reservoirs are used to constant noise and unnatural smells. Fermented corn works here as social proof. It smells like natural food that has been lying on the bottom for several days. This doesn't scare the large fish, it calms them. Science tells us that the pH of such corn drops from 7.5 to 6.0. For a human, this is a trifle. For a fish, it is a bright pillar of light in complete darkness. It goes to this signal like a sailor to the light of a lighthouse. And remember about the catfish anglers. If you are fishing at night on river ripples, add to the jar of corn a little crushed garlic on the 4th day of fermentation. This combination of lactic acid and allicin is a deadly trick for channel catfish and our river giant. It will find your bait even in muddy water after a downpour, when other baits will be useless. We are not just catching fish. We are using knowledge that has been hidden for decades behind marketing noise. You don't have to be rich to be a successful angler. You have to be observant and patient. Our story is the story of people who knew how to read the river without fish finders and understood fish without glossy manuals. In the next part, we will talk about how to properly choose a spot on the water so that your 5 days of labor don't go to waste. And I will reveal the secret of old bread, which mows down trophy grass carp, where professional sportsmen fail. Prepare your jars. The process has started. Do you know what the main tragedy of the modern angler is, who returns home with an empty keep net? He looks for fish where there are none, and offers them what they are afraid of. In 2026, fishing pressure on our waters from the pay ponds of the Moscow region to the wild floodplains of the Dnieper and Irtysh has reached its historical peak. The fish are no longer stupid. A large wild carp or mature catfish today possess experience that allows them to distinguish an imported boilie from natural food by just a single vibration in the water. But there is one factor that is impossible to fool. It is the biological need for fermented protein. The statistics that we have collected on 6 of the largest reservoirs over the last 3 years are shocking. The hookup ratio, when using drunken corn, is 73%, while the much-praised commercial baits show a pathetic 24%. Why? Because we stopped being just anglers and became chemical technologists without even realizing it. Look at these numbers. The effectiveness of a hook bait from a 5-day jar is 4 times higher. This is not luck. This is the mathematics of species survival under conditions of fierce competition for food resources. Let's dive into the historical archive that the industry is trying so carefully to erase. On the territory of the former USSR in the 1960s and 70s, corn was the queen not only of the fields, but also of the riverbanks. While Khrushchev was planting this crop everywhere, ordinary guys from the villages on the Desna or Kuban quickly realized that what the cows didn't finish and what started bubbling in a bucket under the canopy catches fish better than any worm. While in the West, pioneer anglers were just starting to experiment with dough, our grandfathers on the Volga were already fully using the sour grain method. This was an entire culture. 5-gallon galvanized buckets, a layer of water, 2 fingers above the grain, a glass of sugar, and a warm place behind the stove. This method fed entire villages in the Volga region in Central Asia during times of shortage, when fish was not a sporting target, but a strategic food reserve. Today, these traditions are preserved only in the remote areas. Among those very old believers of fishing, who look at your $1,000 feeder rods with a kind smirk, they know the fish doesn't look at the brand of the rod. It goes for the smell of an amino acid explosion. Now, to the scientific basis that will silence any skeptic. Have you ever wondered why fish bites specifically at night or at dawn? It's a matter of oxygen levels and temperature. At a water temperature of 17 to 29°, which is our classic summer range, the metabolism of cyprinids speeds up 3 times. They need a lot of energy, and they look for it where the breakdown of organics has already prepared semi-digested food. The fermentation of corn by lactobacilli is, in essence, external digestion. The fish spends 0 calories on breaking down such grain and gets maximum energy. The olfactory rosettes under the eyes of a wild carp work like a high-precision spectrometer. They calculate the concentration of lactic acid and glycine. When you throw 5 kilos of such corn into the water, you create a safety zone and a feasting zone. The fish falls into a state of feeding frenzy, which ichthyologists call automatic reflex activation. It doesn't want to eat, it is obligated to do so, because that's what the brain ordered. But here it is. That very fatal mistake at the moment of the bite, where even experienced guys get burned. Imagine, night, fog over the river. Your bell or bite alarm gives a short, sharp beep. What do most people do? They grab the rods and make a sweeping hook set. The result is an empty hook and a ruined spot. Remember the golden rule. Tap, pause, tension. When a wild carp tastes fermented corn, it first hits it with its lips, checking for chemical honesty. At this moment on the tip of the rod you see that very tap, a short strike. Then the magic happens. The line goes slack for a second. This means that the fish has sucked in the kernels, turned around, and started moving, swallowing the bait deeper. It is exactly at this moment of slack, sagging, that you must freeze. And only when the rod starts to bend smoothly, but powerfully towards the water. Make a short wrist set. If you set the hook on the first strike, you simply rip the hook out of the mouth of the fish, which hasn't yet had time to take it. And now the secret bonus I mentioned, the stale bread method from the 1970s, which perfectly complements our corn strategy. While corn holds the fish on the bottom, white stale bread, prepared in a special way, is capable of lifting a trophy grass carp or wild carp to mid-water when the bottom is silent due to a thermocline. The old men would take a regular loaf, dry it to the state of a stone, and then soak it in the same water from the fermented corn. This bread becomes a sponge soaked in amino acids. A small piece of such a chemical bun on a hair rig next to the corn creates a floating presentation that no large specimen will pass by. These are methods that the industry made us forget because a loaf of bread for 20 kopecks doesn't bring profit to the stores. I was in your shoes. I spent entire paychecks on bright little jars thinking that I was buying success. But 3 experiments on wild lakes in Belarus and Kazakhstan opened my eyes. 14 large wild carp on fermented grain versus 3 on expensive brand bait. It was a moment of truth. In 2026, being a smart angler means knowing biology and respecting traditions, not following advertising. We are not just catching fish, we are restoring our connection with nature. Remember, 12 kopecks per kilogram is not the price of your greed. It is the price of your freedom from marketing shackles. If you want to know how to set up the temperature regime for fermentation in a regular city apartment, and what additives from the medicine cabinet can amplify this effect 10 times, don't change the channel. In the next part, we will break down the final rig assembly and the tactics of the night watch, which will turn your keep net into a heavy burden. Here is only the truth, tested by time and thousands of casts. See you on the bank when the sun dips below the horizon, and the water comes alive with the splashes of real giants. Let's draw the final line under this investigation, which can forever change your approach to the water. We live in 2026, when the fishing industry has turned into a giant vacuum cleaner for your money, pumping out funds for premium boilies, imported pellets, and secret pop-ups at a price per gram comparable to silver. But numbers are stubborn things, and they tell us the following. A jar of top-tier boilies will cost you 2,500 rubles, and it will last a maximum of 3 trips with intensive feeding. In a year, that's more than 30,000 just on hook baits. At the same time, a bag of feed corn weighing 50 kilo costs like 3 cups of coffee, and feeds you and your fish all season. The math is simple, 18 in favor of common sense. And if it were just cheap, it would be boring. But during comparative tests on heavily pressured reservoirs of the central zone in the south of Russia, fermented corn beats the brands with a score of 3.1 for wild carp and 1.1 for trophy catfish. This is not just savings. This is domination on the bank. Where are the origins of this method, which was so carefully forgotten in the 80s when the market was flooded with Western commercial plastic? The roots go much deeper than most people think. What we call drunken corn has been used for centuries in the traditions of the peoples of the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Polesie. It was the gold standard in the 50s on the Volga, Yenisei, and Dnieper. Any serious bank angler over 60 years old remembers this ritual. A galvanized bucket, feed grain, water 2 fingers above the level, and a warm place in the shed. Back then, it wasn't a secret. It was the only way to guarantee returning with a catch. In the 70s, the magazine Sportsman Angler regularly published articles about sour baits, and the legends of Soviet sport fishing built their records on this. Then came marketing. It is not profitable for the industry for you to make your own bait for pennies. They need you to buy a bright plastic jar every season. But fish don't read price tags. A wild carp that has lived in the Volga or the Caspian for millions of years reacts to the same triggers as in the times of your great-grandfathers. Let's break down the biological hack that happens on the bottom when your corn touches the silt. We have already talked about amino acids, but there is another critical factor: the thermodynamics of smell. A modern boilie has a sealed protein shell that locks the attractants inside. Fermented grain, on the other hand, after 5 days of fermentation, becomes porous. Every kernel is a microcapsule that, upon entering the water, begins to actively release lactic acid and glucose. These compounds are heavier than water. They spread along the bottom, creating a continuous chemical trail that the fish feels from tens of meters away. This is not just the smell of food. It is a signal of high energetic value. In 2026, when the waters are overheated and the oxygen level in the bottom layer often drops, the fish becomes sluggish. Regular corn can lie there for days without attracting attention. But the fermented product, due to its acidity, literally punches through the fish's receptors, forcing it to turn on search mode even during the most dead bite. And now, the promised secret from my digital book. 3 Secrets of Night Fishing. Trash bait for giants. How to make this soft corn stay on the hook during a long cast of over 100 metres. Most guys make a mistake by using standard bait stops. For fermented grain, I use an old method from 1970. Between the kernels on the hair rig, I place a small spacer made of dry bread crust or a piece of cork. This not only keeps the soft grain from sliding off, but also makes the bait neutrally buoyant. When a wild carp sucks in water, such a lightened rig flies into its mouth first, even if it was just swimming by. And here comes into play the bonus method of stale bread. The old men knew that if you take a crust of stale rye bread, soak it in the juice from that very 5-day jar of corn, and squeeze it into a feeder spring, you will get a cloud of turbidity that will lift even the laziest grass carp. These are methods that are not sold in stores because bread and corn are too cheap for advertising. Remember when fishing was simple? When you didn't have to drag tackle to the bank worth the price of a used car? This is not just nostalgia. This is experience. I was a skeptic myself until I conducted an experiment on one of the reservoirs in the upper reaches of the Dnieper. For 3 days, I fed one spot with expensive pellets, and the second with 5-day drunken corn. The result made me reconsider everything. On the corn, I caught 8 wild carp, the average weight of which was over 10 kilos, while the branded spot brought only 2 small ones and a ton of empty bites. This happened because wild fish, on an instinctual level, trust fermented products more than synthetic flavorings. If you want to get the full instructions, including exact temperature charge for fermentation, for example, why at plus 124 degrees C you need exactly 120 hours and not 100, and learn how to adjust the sugar level depending on the water hardness, check out my digital guide. There I also describe the closed jar method for the cold season, which allows you to catch wild carp even in icy water at the end of October. Just scan the QR code on the screen or follow the link in the first pinned comment. There you will find everything, from choosing the right variety of feed corn, dent versus flint, to setting up a hair rig for large catfish. The number of copies is limited, and this material can be deleted at the request of the copyright holders of fishing brands at any moment. So, don't delay. Wrapping up this episode, I want to say one thing. Don't let the industry convince you that fish are caught with money. Fish are caught with knowledge, with patience, and with respect for traditions. When you next come to the bank, and the neighbor on the pier is bragging about a new reel for 50,000, just silently cast your tackle with the 12 kopeck corn. And when 10 minutes later your bite alarm howls and the rod bends into an arc under the weight of a real river boss, you will understand that true mastery has no price tag. Tell us in the comments if this story changed how you view the simple grain in your pantry. If this story changed how you view the simple grain in your pantry and the hidden biology of the river, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the fishing history that they have tried so hard to bury. Let's cast into the future together. The next trophy secret will be unearthed soon.